Before the sea claimed the world of light, there were towers that breathed in color. They rose from the basalt plains of an island whose name has been erased by tides, their facades veined with quartz and pale calcite, their interiors shimmering like the inside of a seashell. Mariners once spoke of its glow, how, on clear nights, the island shone faintly beneath the moon, as though its stones remembered the sun even in darkness. Thousands of years later, that same light would return, faint, fractured, through the lenses of the Orphean II. It was late autumn in the mid-Atlantic, the sea a restless glass stretching between the Azores and the Moroccan coast. The research vessel drifted above a ridge known to oceanographers as the Atlantis Massif, a vast undersea plateau where the Earth's crust folds inward, and where, decades earlier, hydrothermal vents had been found breathing out mineral-rich warmth. Yet the team was not there for vents or microbes. They were searching for geometry, for the inexplicable precision hidden in natural chaos. On the monitors, sonar began to paint what no one expected. A valley carved not by fault lines, but by design. The formation was almost architectural, 3 long corridors converging toward a central dome. Dr. Helena Marin, the expedition's chief archaeologist, leaned closer to the screen. "That symmetry," she whispered, "isn't tectonic." By dawn, the divers were descending. The world below was blue and endless, the light thinning with every meter. At 9,000 feet, the last shimmer of the sun disappeared. Then, in the black, a glint answered. A shard, clear as glass but humming softly through the water, floated up from the silt as if stirred by memory. The divers followed the sound. Their beams traced fallen pillars encrusted with coral, mosaics half consumed by sponges, and arches swallowed by sediment. Among them, crystalline columns lay shattered like broken flutes. When the lights passed over, they sang. The frequency was low, almost a breath, but measurable, an acoustic vibration sustained across millennia. Helena would later describe it as a language beyond erosion. The shards were brought aboard, each encased in seawater to preserve its resonance. Under microscope, they revealed no internal flaw, no fracture lines expected from quartz or calcite. Instead, thin lattices ran through them, complex hexagonal networks, too intricate for natural growth. To the geologist on board, it looked manufactured. To Helena, it looked intentional. She recalled an obscure line from Plato's Critias. The temples of Poseidon shone with the light of orichalcum, and their walls echoed as if struck by song. Orichalcum, an alloy long dismissed as myth, though traces of copper zinc glass had been found in 2015 near Gela, Sicily, from a shipwreck that predated Rome. Could these crystals be some evolved form, an ancient medium of resonance rather than reflection? To test it, they submerged a hydrophone beside one fragment. The hum returned, structured, rhythmic, almost melodic. When slowed down, it revealed patterns like heartbeat intervals. The ocean itself seemed to respond. Currents shifted minutely around the ship, as though sound and tide shared an unseen memory of resonance. Each carved wall contained layered tones, a different register of the same harmonic field. When pieced together, the frequencies formed something like a chord. 5 sustained notes that shifted subtly, almost breathing. Helena remembered the legend of the chambers of Poseidon, halls where knowledge was kept in song, so that even after the flood, wisdom would echo through the sea. To test it, the team sent a controlled sonar pulse through one of the corridors. The walls answered. The returning sound carried patterns not present in the emission, new frequencies, modulated as if by intention. The library wasn't passive. It responded. At 1904 hours, as the last pulse faded, something extraordinary occurred. From the central dome came a soft harmonic swell, deep, resonant, almost human. The recording meters clipped. Then silence. Total sacred silence. Helena stood motionless, headphones pressed to her ears. "That," she said quietly, "wasn't an echo. It was a reply." Later that night, she reviewed the captured audio. Hidden within the low frequencies were harmonics forming a recurring interval, the same that had been detected in the crystals from Chapter 1. Across time and depth, the sound repeated, the heartbeat of a vanished world. She marked it in her notes as the Atlantean Fifth. In her cabin she wrote, "We found their library, not of words but of tone." That night, while the data streamed in quiet pulses across her screen, Helena sat alone on deck. The air was heavy with salt and static. She thought of how civilizations once aligned their temples to the stars, carving stone not merely for worship but for remembrance, turning earth into music, time into architecture. Could the Atlanteans, or whoever built this drowned city, have tried to record not history but the world itself? Each stone remembers a voice. Each echo is a page turned by the tide. Perhaps knowledge does not vanish. It merely changes medium. Before dawn, the sea quieted once more. When the submersible returned the next morning, the dome no longer sang. The water was cold, inert, and the grooves on the walls seemed shallow, ordinary erosion. Whatever presence had awakened in the stone had returned to rest. Helena closed her logbook. "It spoke," she said. "That's enough." And outside, the ocean exhaled. A slow, endless breath, as if completing the sentence the earth had begun. The Orphean II kept drifting east along the basalt ridge where the library had sung its last tone. The sea was smooth, heavy with silence, as if the world itself were catching its breath after speech. At 7:42, sonar traced a silhouette on the seafloor, tall, singular, rising from the ridge like a sentinel. It stood apart from the carved terraces, alone amid plains of ash-gray silt. Helena adjusted the gain. The shape remained human, colossal, unmoving. By afternoon, the submersible Nereid descended again. The water was green-black, alive with drifting plankton that glowed faintly under the floodlights. As they neared the seabed, a shadow emerged, the suggestion of a face beneath the waves. The following dive revealed more. A vast hall opened beneath layers of coral, its floor paved in hexagonal plates that shimmered faintly when touched by light. The divers moved cautiously, weightless in the suspended dusk. On the central dais, a structure rose, a spiral of fused crystal and basalt, hollow at its core. Instruments registered faint electromagnetic fields pulsing outward in concentric waves. Then light found stone. A statue, 40 meters high, carved from obsidian streaked with veins of metal. The head alone was larger than the Nereid. Its features were serene, not divine but profoundly human, eyes half-closed, lips curved in the faintest trace of sorrow. It gazed west, toward the trench where the sun had once risen from below. The divers approached slowly. Around the base, fragments of other figures lay scattered, arms, wings, broken masks, as though the sea had dismantled an entire pantheon and left only its witness. The instruments showed residual magnetism emanating from within the statue's core, pulsing every 12 seconds, the same rhythm as the Atlantean Fifth. The reading rose whenever sonar touched its chest. Helena's voice came through the comms. "It's resonating with the library." The divers circled the head. Across the cheekbones ran narrow grooves filled with calcite. Within them, copper inlays caught the light like veins of fire. On the brow, a single spiral had been etched, identical to the one found in the Temple of the Buried Sun. One diver's camera panned upward. There, along the crown, small circular cavities formed a pattern. When plotted, they aligned precisely with the pre-deluge constellations of Lyra. Helena murmured. It was meant to look upward, even as it drowned. They descended toward the base. Embedded in the plinth were panels of basalt engraved with symbols, rows of triangles alternating with long wavelines. The translation algorithm matched them to Proto-Aegean pictograms for water and return. Helena whispered, "A warning or a remembrance?" When a gloved hand brushed the stone, a tremor passed through the seabed. Silt rose like smoke. The magnetic readings spiked, then faintly a tone. Deep, distant, identical to the fifth harmonic. The statue itself was singing. Back aboard, the analysis revealed cavities within the chest cavity, resonant chambers carved intentionally to vibrate with ocean currents. It was an acoustic monument, a sentinel built not only to watch, but to remember through sound. That night, Helena stood on deck, windless air pressing against her skin. The coordinates of the statue traced a line connecting all previous sites: the Crystal Valley, the map, the mirrored city, the temple, the library. Each lay along a single meridian, forming what she called the axis of memory. At its base lay symbols, spirals, suns, and lines that curved like sound waves. They matched motifs carved on early Neolithic stele in Iberia and Malta, patterns often interpreted as solar calendars or trance symbols. The parallel was impossible, and yet there it was, luminous in the dark. She imagined the day the flood began, waters rising, towers collapsing, priests carving this last figure as the waves reached their feet. Perhaps they built it not as idol or plea, but as recorder, a vessel for the memory of light. In the quiet, the ship's hull vibrated faintly. A deep hum from below, rhythmic, patient. The sea was still communicating, the voice of stone traveling through miles of water. Before dawn, Helena wrote in her logbook, "It does not watch us. It watches what we have forgotten. Its eyes are fixed on the hour when the world turned to water." As the sun rose above the Atlantic, a faint shimmer crossed the waves, as if some immense reflection stirred far beneath. The statue remained unseen, but its resonance lingered through the ship's metal bones, the last heartbeat of an empire that refused to vanish completely. The night after the statue's discovery, the Orphean II drifted in absolute stillness. The ocean was calm, the kind of calm that feels aware of itself, vast, listening. Every metal beam of the ship hummed faintly, as if echoing something distant. At 2209, the sound began again. It rose softly through the hull, not mechanical, not storm or current, but layered tone. A resonance composed of countless frequencies, weaving together like a living breath. The engineers froze. The hydrophones registered harmonics in perfect intervals, spanning almost the full spectrum of human hearing. Helena's voice came through the silence. "Record everything." On the monitors, spectrograms unfolded like constellations of sound. Each pattern pulsed with rhythmic intelligence. It was not random noise. It was organized, rising and falling in synchronized cycles. The ocean itself was singing. When one diver brushed the spiral with his gloved hand, the water trembled. A tone, clear, sorrowful, filled the hall. It reverberated through the hull of the submersible, through the bones of those who heard it. For a moment, the ocean seemed to sing. They triangulated the source, 200 meters west of the statue. By midnight, the Nereid was in the water. As the submersible descended, the sound grew stronger, no longer merely heard but felt. A low vibration running through the ribs and lungs, through the bones of the vessel. Lights flickered along the control panel. Electromagnetic readings surged. Then, through the black water, movement, not of fish or current, but of luminescence. Helena whispered, "Look!" The seabed glowed faintly, lines of blue-white light forming circular patterns across the sand. Within each ring stood shards of crystal and fragments of mirror, half buried, resonating together like strings of an unseen harp. The tone deepened. It was as though the sea itself had awakened a choir of stone. The divers hovered in silence. Their lamps revealed swaying particles, vibrating in perfect rhythm with the song. When they spoke, their voices were swallowed instantly. The water absorbed all speech, allowing only the collective hum to exist. Helena realized the sound matched the Atlantean fifth, multiplied 1,000 times, woven through the seabed itself. The pattern was global, far beyond their coordinates. "It's transmitting," she whispered, "through the crust, through the whole ocean." The submersible sensors began to register minute changes in salinity and temperature, rhythmic fluctuations in time with the harmonics. The sea was responding, alive in synchronization. For one impossible moment, the boundary between geology and biology vanished. Then, a voice. Not speech, but a modulation within the sound. Distinct, rising like a breath drawn through ancient lungs. A pattern repeated every 20 seconds, translated visually on the monitor as a cluster of spirals, the same symbol carved on every site. Later analysis showed the tone corresponded to 432 Hz, an ancient tuning frequency used in Egyptian and Greek instruments, associated with natural resonance and harmony with Earth's vibration. Coincidence, perhaps, but in that moment, none aboard the Orpheon 2 believed in coincidence. "Can you hear it?" one diver murmured. Helena closed her eyes. "It's not speaking to us. It's remembering itself." For 20 minutes, the choir continued, tones folding upon tones, an endless descent into resonance. The submersible vibrated as if suspended inside the heartbeat of the planet. When the sound finally ceased, the silence that followed felt immense, sacred. Even the ocean seemed reluctant to move. Back aboard the Orpheon 2, the crew played back the recording. The frequencies overlapped perfectly with earlier data from the crystals, the temple, and the library. Every tone was connected, each site a voice within one vast composition. Helena stood at the viewport, watching the Atlantic stretch into night. "We thought we were studying ruins," she said softly. "But they were never silent. They've been singing all along, waiting for the sea to join the chorus." That night, the crew could not sleep. The ship's hull continued to vibrate with residual frequencies, subtle as breathing. Helena wrote her entry by lamplight. "The sea remembers through vibration. The world hums beneath our feet, and we are only listeners." The deeper they searched, the more the boundary between myth and geology dissolved. Radiocarbon readings from encrusted pottery fragments indicated an age of over 11,000 years, matching the approximate timeline Plato gave for the fall of Atlantis. The skeptics aboard offered simpler theories: seismic misreadings, data anomalies, wishful imagination. Yet each night, when the lights dimmed and the engines quieted, the hum returned from the deep, steady, sentient, patient, caught between memory and echo. As dawn rose pale and uncertain, the last harmonics faded. But even as the ship's instruments quieted, the Atlantic seemed to shimmer, a calm surface holding a secret song just beyond hearing. And deep below, the choir waited, eternal, patient, woven into the bones of the earth. 3 days after the sea fell silent, the Orpheon 2 sailed west, guided not by coordinates but by instinct, by the faint magnetic pulse that seemed to pull the ship like a heartbeat beneath the compass. The Atlantic had grown eerily bright. Even at night, the waves carried a pale, internal glow, as though light were rising from the depths instead of falling into them. Helena watched from the bridge. The air smelled of ozone and iron. "It feels," she murmured, "as if something is remembering itself." At dawn, a mist rose, not fog from air and temperature, but a fine vapor exhaled by the sea itself, phosphorescent, curling like breath. Through it, shapes began to appear. Jagged outlines, silhouettes of terraces, faint ridges rising from the water. "Land?" whispered the navigator, disbelief trembling in his voice. As the mist cleared, an island revealed itself, small, circular, surrounded by black stone reefs. Its surface shimmered with crystal sand and terraces of pale basalt that seemed carved rather than natural. Yet no island existed here on any chart. Some nights it grew louder. They named it Orpheon Ridge, though Helena called it something else in her notes. The island that dreamed of return. The crew lowered a drone. Its cameras glided over broken columns, submerged courtyards, and stairways leading down into the sea, as though the island had risen only halfway from its grave. Coral grew along the edges of doorways. Fish drifted through windows that opened to sky. Every surface gleamed with mineral sheen, half wet, half light. Then the drone captured something impossible, a structure on the inner slope, circular, intact. In its center, a black spire pierced upward, humming faintly. Around it, glyphs spiraled in perfect formation, glowing whenever the tide lapped over them. Helena descended herself. The air was dense with salt and silence. She stepped barefoot onto the stone. The ground thrummed faintly beneath her soles, an echo of the frequencies they had recorded from the choir below. Her voice caught in her throat. "It's still connected," she whispered. The walls of the structure bore carvings of faces half human, half aquatic. Not monsters, but mourners. Each one looked upward, mouths open, as if singing. And all around the central spire, A continuous inscription ran in circular flow. The symbols were similar to those on the statue's base, but new elements appeared. Lines like waves turning inward, intersected by spirals. She traced them slowly with her hand. The translation algorithm flickered, then stabilized. When memory rises, the sea will open its breath. We will return as light. A sudden wind crossed the island, sharp and cold. The sea began to rise. Helena turned toward the horizon. The mist had thickened again, closing like curtains. The spire's hum deepened, resonating with the ocean's pitch. Helena began recording it, layering the frequencies until the hum became a chorus of tones, rising and falling like breathing. In the pauses, faint harmonics shimmered, notes that no human ear had reason to invent. "They're not calling to us," she murmured to her assistant. "They're remembering themselves." The crew called out from the ship. Instruments showed a rapid drop in pressure. The island trembled, the stone vibrating beneath her feet. Then a sound, low, beautiful, immense. The same tone that had once come from the choir, now rising through the stone like a voice remembering its name. Helena backed toward the waterline. "It's sinking," shouted one of the divers. But it didn't sink. It dissolved. The basalt terraces faded into light, as if unmade from within. The air itself shimmered, a mirror turning liquid. The island's outline blurred, then broke apart like reflection on disturbed water. Within seconds, the sea was empty again. Only ripples remained, glowing faintly in concentric rings where land had been. On board, Helena stood drenched and silent. The data showed no trace of solid mass, only energy flux, harmonic interference. "It never rose," she murmured. "It remembered." That night, she wrote, "There are places that return not to be found, but to remind the ocean that it once had form. Some islands rise, and others simply remember how to be seen." For a moment, she imagined the world before it drowned. The crystal towers reflecting sunlight into the sea, storing each vibration, each word, as memory. When the waves rose and the people fled, perhaps the stones remained, carrying within them the echo of their civilization's final song. A song that waited, beneath pressure and darkness, to be heard again. When dawn came, the coordinates showed only water, calm, endless, and perfectly still. But the crew swore that, for a moment, the air itself had glowed, as if an island had taken a single breath and gone back to sleep. The day after the island vanished, the Orphean too sailed east into waters dense with silence. The ocean seemed heavier, slower, as if remembering something vast. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, not violent, but monumental, dark blue and shot with veins of light. By mid-afternoon, instruments began to misbehave. The compass spun, electromagnetic readings climbed erratically. Static rippled through every radio channel. Helena watched the lightning strike the sea again and again, always in the same place, 30 nautical miles ahead. "That's not random," she murmured. They steered toward the storm. At 1942, sonar revealed an underwater plateau shaped like a half-collapsed dome. The lightning seemed to focus directly above it, striking the same coordinates repeatedly, as if drawn there by design. The ocean around the site pulsed faintly, charged with blue luminescence. The Nereid descended at dusk. The divers passed through water alive with electric shimmer. Their suits crackled softly. Hair rose beneath helmets. And then they saw it. An amphitheater of stone embedded in the ridge, built of basalt fused with copper veins. The walls were streaked with metallic residue, glimmering like frozen lightning. At the center stood 5 enormous pillars, tilted and broken, each covered in spiral carvings identical to those in the temple and the library. At dawn, she replayed the latest recording. The ship's engines were silent, the crew still asleep. Outside, the Atlantic lay flat as glass. The sound began low and distant, like wind beneath a cathedral door. Then, almost imperceptibly, a pattern emerged. 5 rising tones, then stillness, then a descent. It was not human, yet hauntingly deliberate. When the first beam of light touched the carvings, the pillars began to hum, low, resonant, trembling through the water. Static filled the comms. A diver reached toward the nearest pillar and felt a pulse run through his arm, gentle but unmistakably alive. "Conductive crystal," murmured Helena. "They built with thunder." Each pillar emitted a faint glow when lightning struck above. Energy moved down through the sea, illuminating the engravings. The instruments detected electrical charge traveling across the stone network, a lattice running deep beneath the ridge. It wasn't natural. It was engineered. On the chamber's floor lay fragments of black glass, vitrified sand fused by extreme heat. Analysis would later reveal traces of quartz and magnetite, elements capable of storing charge. The site had once been a power field, harvesting storms to feed the civilization's heart. Helena remembered a line from an obscure Babylonian tablet in the British Museum. "The kings of the West drew fire from the sky and bound it in stone." She realized the legends were describing the Atlantean art of lightning. But as the diverse explored further, a strange phenomenon began. Whenever they passed between the pillars, faint melodic tones emerged, harmonic pulses shaped by electricity. The sound wasn't random. It followed the exact interval of the Atlantean fifth. The pillars were singing. The choir of the sea had found its echo on land. Each bolt of lightning above sent a wave of resonance below, charging the stones until they glowed from within. The entire structure became an instrument, an ancient symphony between sky and ocean. Helena closed her eyes. In that sound, she heard not technology, not myth, but longing, the ocean's slow remembering of the sun. Helena's voice trembled over the intercom. This was never mythology. Its architecture tuned to weather. For nearly half an hour, the lightning continued. Then, without warning, the storm broke apart. A vast circle of clear air opening above the ridge. The sea stilled. The pillars dimmed. In the silence, a final sound lingered. A single note, rising from the stones, faint but pure. It lasted almost a minute, fading into the heartbeat of the waves. When they surfaced, the night sky had cleared. Aurora-like curtains shimmered low over the horizon, colors rippling silently through space. The crew watched in awe. Helena recorded her entry. The ancients captured storms, not to wield them, but to remember them. Each pillar is a frozen bolt, each tone a memory of thunder. Perhaps Atlantis did not fall. Perhaps it discharged. Later analysis would confirm a residual field stretching along the mid-Atlantic ridge, magnetic veins still active after 10 millennia. But the stones themselves were quiet now, their charge spent, their song returned to silence. As dawn broke, the sea glowed faintly, silver on black. The Orphean II drifted through the calm, every instrument steady once more. Only the soft hum of the hull remained, echoing the last note of the storm. The Orphean II completed its final dive weeks later, bringing up only fragments, no intact city, no definitive proof. The crystals were sealed and sent to laboratories across Europe, where they now rest in silent drawers, their hums stilled by air. Reports labeled them as piezoelectric composites of unknown origin. The official record ended there. The storm had passed. For the first time in weeks, the Atlantic lay calm. Unnaturally calm, its surface smooth as glass. The horizon shimmered like a mirror, sky and water indistinguishable. The Orphean II drifted without engines. The crew spoke in whispers. Even sound seemed reluctant to break the silence. Helena stood at the rail, staring down at the reflection of the ship upon the water. A second world, inverted, perfectly still. Then she noticed something beneath the reflection. Movement. "Lower the cameras," she said softly. At 40 meters, the water turned pale green. At 60, gold. At 80, light broke open. A plain of crystal domes covering the seabed like transparent shells. Beneath them, forests shimmered. Not seaweed, not coral, but structures shaped like trees of glass, branches growing in spirals, covered in phosphorescent leaves that pulsed gently with inner light. The crew watched the feed in silence. An entire garden was alive beneath the Atlantic, sealed beneath a thin dome of fused silica, a greenhouse of time. But those who were aboard remember the nights differently. The way the sea seemed to breathe beneath the hull, how lights shimmered faintly along the waterline, as though something vast and ancient stirred below. The Nereid descended slowly through the luminous water. As they approached, they realized that each dome was intact, whole, perfectly preserved. The submersible glided over canopies of glass leaves that swayed in invisible current, each one reflecting light like an ancient mosaic. Helena whispered, "A city that learned to breathe underwater." The sonar revealed narrow passageways between domes, tunnels of transparent mineral leading inward toward a central structure. They followed. The corridor opened into a vast circular hall, a sphere of glass 30 meters wide, filled with what appeared to be light itself. It shimmered, liquid and living. Within it floated filaments, long, thread-like organisms emitting soft blue glow. Their motion was slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Every few seconds, they aligned with one another, forming spirals that mirrored the Atlantean glyphs. Helena's voice was hushed. Bioluminescent synchronization, not random. They're responding to electromagnetic frequency. The instruments confirmed it. The resonance from the storm pillars was still detectable, faint but constant. The creatures were aligning to that pulse, a biological echo of ancient engineering. Atlantis had not only shaped stone, it had shaped life. One diver extended a probe toward the nearest filament. The water shimmered, and the light dimmed slightly, then brightened again, like the rhythm of breath. The response was measured, gentle. It was not fear. It was recognition. "These gardens were not decoration," Helena murmured. "They were reactors, living conduits." The Atlanteans fused biology and energy, ecosystems as memory systems. The submersible drifted upward, passing through layers of color. On the dome's interior, etched faintly into the glass, were words or symbols, arranged in circular sequences. The translation program struggled, then produced a phrase, "Where light sleeps, memory grows." Even now, when the tide is still and the air holds its breath, some say the crystals can be heard faintly through the deep-sea transmitters near the Azores, singing in tones that rise and fade like the memory of dawn. Helena read it aloud. The crew said nothing. As they ascended, they passed over another chamber, half-collapsed. Inside it, they saw remains, skeletal outlines encased in crystal. The bodies were positioned upright, as though standing among their living gardens when the flood came. Over them, the branches of glass trees still glowed faintly, as if keeping vigil. No one spoke again for the rest of the dive. Back aboard, Helena wrote by lantern light. The flood did not destroy everything, transformed. They built gardens to store light, to keep life breathing beneath ruin. The sea did not bury Atlantis. It cultivated it. As she finished, the ship's windows reflected the calm sea outside, a sheet of glass stretching into infinity. And far below, beneath that glass tide, the gardens continued to glow, softly, endlessly. Perhaps they are fragments of Atlantis, like thoughts the earth had not yet forgotten to dream. For days, the sea was calm, too calm, as though it were holding its breath after a long confession. The Orphean II drifted south along the same ridge, tracing a path the instruments could barely follow. Magnetic readings faded to zero. Even sonar returned empty screens. Then, at dawn on the 7th day, the silence itself changed. Not a sound, not even a hum, only pressure, dense and invisible, pressing gently against the hull like a held note. Helena stood on deck, eyes fixed on the water. "We're near something," she whispered. "But it doesn't want to be seen." She ordered a slow descent. The Nereid slipped beneath the glass-like sea, leaving a wake that closed instantly behind it. The deeper they went, the clearer the water became. No plankton, no color, only the perfect stillness of distilled light. At 3,900 meters, the sensors detected a vertical wall. Smooth, seamless, not rock. Material analysis showed crystallized halite, pure salt fused under immense pressure. The floodlights touched it, and the entire surface glowed, faint, white, spectral. An expanse of translucent cliffs stretching endlessly in both directions. Perhaps they are nothing but stone. The divers descended along the wall until the instruments caught a curve, a hollow arch carved into the salt. The opening was enormous, at least 50 meters tall. Its edges were etched with glyphs Helena had seen before, the same spirals, the same mirrored patterns, but here they were perfect, unweathered. The gate of salt and silence. Inside, the sound returned, not as noise, but as vibration through the body, an almost imperceptible rhythm pulsing in the bones. The submersible lights caught fine crystalline dust drifting like snow, each flake reflecting faint luminescence. Beyond the arch lay a tunnel, its walls glowing softly, narrowing into darkness. They advanced slowly, surrounded by a silence so complete it felt sacred. Halfway through, the sensors began detecting faint electromagnetic oscillations, identical to the ones from the lightning stones, but weaker, slower. The walls themselves were resonating. Helena realized what they were.
Salt archive.
Layers of mineral sound. Every vibration ever captured by the surrounding rock preserved as microcrystals of resonance. "This place is not empty," she whispered. "It's recording us." At the tunnel's end, they reached a chamber spherical, vast, hollow. Its ceiling shimmered with countless fractures of light, as though the sun itself had been broken and buried here. In the center stood a pillar of pure salt, smooth and translucent, glowing from within. Inside it, suspended like insects in amber, were objects, shards of crystal, fragments of metal, a single copper mask with closed eyes. Helena pressed her palm to the glassy surface. A faint tone rippled outward, the Atlantean fifth, low and steady. Or perhaps they are what the ocean became when it tried to remember the sky. The gate had memory. The recordings from the chamber would later show that the tone matched frequencies emitted by deep-sea faults, the heartbeat of the Earth itself. The Atlanteans had built this final monument not to worship, nor to command, but to synchronize. It was a resonance chamber, a harmonic bridge between the planet's pulse and their own. Helena stood in silence for a long time. Through the viewport, the pillar seemed to breathe with the rhythm of her own heart. She wrote in her log, "The gate stands where memory ends. Salt preserves what water forgets. The sea recorded their passing, and now records us." When the Nereid began its ascent, the light from the chamber dimmed gradually, as though the gate were closing behind them. And as they rose through the layers of still water, not even bubbles followed, only the faintest vibration, like the echo of an unfinished hymn. The recording ends in silence, and for a long moment, the only sound is the sea itself, breathing, echoing, alive. Back aboard, the ship's instruments fell silent. No readings, no sound. Only the hum of salt drying on the hull. The Orphean II turned north. Behind them, the gate vanished into pressure and light. The silence perfect, eternal, complete. Night fell without horizon. The sea and the sky had merged into a single plane of darkness, a mirror of the unseen. The Orphean II drifted quietly, engines dormant, surrounded by the same stillness that had followed every discovery, the silence of completion. The crew barely spoke. After the gate of salt and silence, there was nothing left to find, only the feeling that something immense had ended. The instruments showed no signal, no magnetic field, no resonance. The Atlantic had become an empty page again. Helena Marin stood at the observation window. Her reflection floated over black water, faintly ghosted by starlight. She opened her notebook, the pages salt-stained and warped, and wrote without thinking. The sea remembers. It holds no anger, no grief, only reflection. Some voices, it seems, never stop singing. Outside, the current shifted. A faint hum passed through the hull, softer than sound, more like memory brushing against the ship. Helena closed her eyes. It was the same frequency, the Atlantean fifth, reduced to a whisper. She ordered the hydrophones reactivated. Static filled the speakers, then a tone. Faint, continuous, fragile as breath. The coordinates matched none of the known sites, It was everywhere at once, coming not from below, but from the water itself. The sea was singing again. The tone deepened, then divided, forming intervals, harmonics. It wasn't the structured chorus of Chapter 7, it was simpler, older. The melody of dissolution. Every vibration seemed to echo the motion of the waves, as though the ocean were folding the expedition's story into its own. On deck, the crew stood silently. The stars trembled on the water's surface, reflected like constellations redrawn by time. Helena turned on the main recorder. "This is Orphean 2, she said softly, her voice steady, reverent. "Final log entry. The ocean speaks, and we listen." The sound grew warmer, fuller. The instruments began to resonate sympathetically, vibrating in harmony. Metal, glass, even the human body joined the frequency. The ship itself became an instrument, tuned to the same note as the sea. And then, just as the tone reached its deepest resonance, light returned. Not from the sky, but from beneath. The water glowed faint blue, waves of luminescence spreading outward from the hull. They pulsed gently, synchronizing with the sound. It was the rhythm of all that had been found. The crystals that remembered the sea. They only wait for us to listen. The city beneath mirrors. The temple of the buried sun. The library that spoke in waves. The statue that watched the flood. The choir beneath the waves. The garden beneath the glass tide. The gate of salt and silence. Every sight, every tone, every vibration. All returned now, merged into one luminous frequency. The sea wasn't answering. It was concluding. The sound rose once, bright and clear, before fading. The luminescence followed, retreating into the deep. Within minutes, the ocean was dark again. The night after the crystals sang, the sea grew strangely calm. The instruments aboard the Orphean 2 still registered faint harmonics beneath the waves, but something else surfaced that evening, a pattern that belonged neither to sound nor to current. On one of the digital seafloor scans, thin lines appeared, interlaced arcs and geometric corridors, far too deliberate for fault lines. They resembled a map not of land but of resonance itself. Helena kept her eyes on the reflection of the stars. She whispered, "Perhaps it was never lost. Perhaps we were." In her final entry, she wrote, "Atlantis was never a place. It was a pattern, a resonance between memory and matter. When the sea remembers, it sings." At 4:11, the instruments fell silent. The Orphean 2 turned toward home. Dr. Helena Marin stood before the monitor, its green light flickering across her face. "These aren't trenches," she whispered. "They're alignments." The data technician nodded uncertainly. The lines seemed to spiral outward from the valley of the crystalline ruins, like veins of sound reaching into the abyss. When Helena overlaid magnetic field data from the Atlantis Massif, the pattern matched perfectly. It was as though the ocean floor had been designed to conduct memory. And as dawn rose, the Atlantic shimmered, not with light, but with remembrance. The expedition was over. But beneath that endless mirror, the last song still moved, slow, eternal, and alive. The sea is quiet now. The waves move without urgency, as if the world itself were breathing in its sleep. We have followed echoes through darkness, found cities that remembered light, and songs that spoke in stone. What remains is not ruin, but rhythm. Later, as wind brushed across the deck, she unrolled an ancient vellum reproduction, a 16th century copy of the Pyrie Reis map, drawn long before modern navigation. Along its curling ink, the edges of the Atlantic bore faint marks, notations describing submerged lands, the islands of the dawn before the flood. She traced them with her finger, and for the first time, she wondered whether the Atlanteans had left more than monuments. Perhaps they had charted the world's invisible currents, a cartography not of continents, but of vibration. A memory folded into water, waiting for dreamers to listen. Perhaps Atlantis was never lost. Perhaps it became what it always wished to be, a reflection, eternal, carried by the tides. As you drift into sleep, hear the pulse beneath your breath, The same pulse that once moved through crystal towers and buried suns. It is still here, soft, patient, remembering. At dawn, the submersible Nereid descended again. Floodlights pierced the deep. Suspended particles swirled like constellations in slow motion. The team followed the coordinates the map suggested. A corridor leading east-southeast, into a trench where light seemed to bend away. There, half buried in silt, they found something unexpected. A stone disc nearly 3 meters across, carved with interlocking spirals. Around its rim, faint glyphs glowed when the lights passed. Not painted, but etched with microscopic precision, like channels for sound. The ocean remembers for us, and tonight it sings you home. The disc rested atop what appeared to be a dais. When sonar touched it, a pulse rippled outward and returned. Not as echo, but as response. A second pulse answered from deeper still. Helena ordered all engines stopped. The sea grew motionless. Even the fish seemed to vanish. Then, a tone, low and immense, filled the water. It was not mechanical. It was the map singing back. Helena's breathing slowed. The readings showed a harmonic frequency connecting the Valley of Crystals to the disk, and beyond that to several magnetic anomalies across the mid-Atlantic ridge. Together, they formed a vast resonant network, as though the Atlanteans had built their civilization along an invisible instrument the Earth itself once played. Back on the ship, the team analyzed every line, every frequency. The pattern corresponded roughly with ancient seafaring routes mentioned in Egyptian papyri describing the Western Islands, where the priests of Sais claimed knowledge older than the Nile. Even Plato's Timaeus hinted at such geometry, circles of power connecting the temples of Poseidon. But here, on the Orphean II, theory and legend converged into a living sound map. For nights afterward, Helena worked without rest. She projected overlays of tectonic data, stellar positions, and Pyre Reese markings onto a digital sphere. Gradually, a design emerged. 12 nodes, each corresponding to known megalithic sites: Stonehenge, the Azores, the Yucatan, the Canary Shelf. Between them, subtle harmonic pathways crossed the Atlantic like veins of forgotten light. Perhaps, she murmured, they mapped the Earth as a living body, and Atlantis was its heart. One evening, while reviewing footage, she noticed something she could not explain. In one frame, just before the submersible's camera flickered, a faint silhouette appeared at the edge of the light. A column, perfectly smooth, bearing the same spiral motif as the disk. The structure rose and vanished into darkness. When slowed to a single frame, it revealed markings inlaid with reflective mineral, an inscription in no known language, yet its curvature echoed ancient linear A. Helena leaned closer. The letters formed a phrase she could almost read, as if the human mind still carried the code. Ahasing Taumar. Later, she translated it loosely as Path of the Sleeping Sea. After that night, no one on board slept easily. The following morning, the crew found their magnetic compasses drifting several degrees east, though the ship had not moved. The ocean around them felt charged, luminous. A fine mist clung to the air like static memory. When the hydrophones were lowered again, they captured layered frequencies, tones too organized to be noise, yet too ancient to be voice. On the 7th day, the sound ceased. The map's coordinates no longer aligned. The ocean's geometry had shifted, as though aware of their observation. Helena closed her notebook, the pages heavy with salt. Perhaps it was never meant to be followed, she said softly. That night, she dreamt of the map floating before her in darkness. Lines of light forming and dissolving, tracing corridors that led not into places, but into memory itself. And somewhere, beyond the reach of her sight, the sea exhaled. A long, slow breath, ancient as the first tide. When morning came, the horizon was empty. Only the hum remained, faint and eternal, whispering through the ship's hull, the map's last echo, leading forever into shadow. 3 nights passed before the sea gave its next secret. The Orphean II had drifted west, following the last harmonic traces of the sound map. Storms had passed overhead, but beneath the waves, the Atlantic had become unervingly still, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. At 2:13 hours, sonar picked up a grid of shapes across the sediment plain, too regular to be volcanic. The pattern extended for nearly 2 kilometers, parallel corridors and angular fields, each aligned to the magnetic north. Helena stared at the live scan, her fingertips pressed to the glass. "It's a city," she whispered, "but not built for eyes." By dawn, the submersible Nereid was ready. Descent began through a suspended fog of plankton, glowing faintly like a field of stars. As they approached the seafloor, light began to behave strangely. Reflections multiplied. Even the beam of the headlamp fractured into prisms. Then the city appeared, not rising, but shimmering into being. Columns of glass-like stone towered from the silt, arranged in concentric circles. Every surface was polished to impossible smoothness, reflecting the divers' lights in cascading spectrums. The architecture seemed designed not to be seen, but to echo light endlessly, each wall becoming a mirror to another, folding the sea into infinity. Helena's voice came through the comms. "Record everything. Don't touch the walls." Her words felt less like command, more like prayer. The divers advanced slowly. Around them, the ruins formed mirrored avenues, archways, and terraces covered in coral. Yet the reflections remained clean, untouched by life. Instruments showed minimal sediment accumulation. It was as if the city resisted time itself. At the center lay a great square plaza, half buried under sand. In its middle, a circular dais carved with hundreds of concave plates, arranged like the eyes of a vast insect. When one diver's lamp swept across it, the entire floor came alive, each plate catching the beam, reflecting it outward until the water bloomed with light. For a brief moment, the city shone as it must have in its prime, a realm of radiance beneath the sea. Back on the Orpheon II, the footage revealed more detail. Each mirror plate bore faint geometric inscriptions, triangular spirals, similar to those in the map of resonance. The arrangement corresponded to star positions circa 9600 BCE, the same period Plato attributed to the fall of Atlantis. Helena cross-referenced them with the ancient Egyptian Book of Two Ways, whose diagrams represented the soul's passage through mirrored portals. "Perhaps," she murmured, "these weren't mirrors of vanity, but of memory." Later that night, the divers returned to recover one plate. When they lifted it, the city dimmed. Pressure readings spiked. A low hum filled the sea, not mechanical, but harmonic, like a whale's distant call. The reflection from the plate shimmered against the diver's suit. For a moment, their own face dissolved, replaced by another. A man of bronze skin and braided hair, his eyes closed, as if still dreaming within the mirror. The diver froze. Then the vision was gone. On board, Helena examined the plate under polarized light. Beneath layers of calcite lay a second surface, a thin metallic film fused into the stone. When exposed to certain frequencies, it emitted faint luminescence. "Photonic memory," whispered one of the engineers. "It's storing reflected light." Helena nodded. "Or remembering it." The discovery triggered a deeper descent the following day. The city's lower terraces revealed chambers filled with suspended mirror shards, like frozen waves mid-motion. On the walls, glyphs depicted human figures kneeling before circles of reflected light, offering crystal rods toward the sun. In one mural, the sea itself was shown as a great mirror, and beneath it, the caption in proto-linear script, "The world above is a reflection of the one below." By nightfall, a storm gathered above. The sea churned, yet inside the submersible, silence reigned. Helena gazed at the mirrored halls through the viewport, reflections layering upon reflections until the city became an infinite dreamscape. For a moment, she could no longer tell whether the submersible was moving or whether the city itself was breathing. She realized the mirrors were not meant to show images, but to store them. Every reflection that ever fell upon them remained suspended in mineral light. The city had become an archive of vision, a silent record of what the sea had once seen. The next morning, the ocean had changed color. A metallic gleam shimmered beneath the surface like the faint afterglow of dawn. When the team replayed the sonar, the city no longer appeared. the mirrors had gone dark. Helena wrote in her logbook, "It was not ruins we found, but remembrance itself. Perhaps the city still stands, not beneath the sea, but behind its reflection." The hum never returned. Only the quiet murmur of waves, soft, eternal, as if the sea had folded its memories away. The ocean was quiet after the storm. The Orphean too drifted over dark water, its hull creaking softly, like a sleeper turning in its dreams. For days, the crew moved with unspoken restraint. Since the disappearance of the mirrored city, the sea itself seemed changed, heavier, darker, yet charged with a faint luminescence, as if the memory of light still trembled below. At dawn on the fifth day, sonar registered a new formation. Not a city nor a corridor, but a circle. A perfect ring of basalt pillars standing at the lip of a trench more than 4 kilometers deep. They named it Site Theta, though one of the divers whispered another word under his breath. Temple. Helena watched the readings in silence. The basalt was unnaturally uniform, each pillar 20 meters high, perfectly equidistant, as if carved by a geometry that ignored erosion. Around the ring, faint heat signatures rippled through the silt. The thermal scanner showed pockets of warmth, impossible at that depth, unless something beneath was still alive. By noon, the Nereid was in the water. As it descended, the sea grew copper dark, the sunlight thinning until it became only memory. The pillars rose slowly from the abyssal plain, their tips covered in pale sediment, their sides engraved with spirals and rays like a frozen sunburst. Between them, black sand spread outward like an altar. The divers moved with reverence. Instruments registered residual magnetism in the basalt, pulsing faintly, not random but rhythmic. It reminded Helena of a heartbeat. She thought of ancient solar temples, of Abydos, Heliopolis, and Tiwanaku, each aligned to the rising of the sun, built to capture its breath. But here, beneath the Atlantic, the orientation was reversed. These pillars faced west, toward the sinking light. The trench below them was black beyond imagination. The sonar showed nothing beneath, only depth, descending into silence. Helena's voice, soft over the comms. The ancients buried their dead toward the setting sun. Perhaps they buried their god the same way. They approached the center. There, half buried in sand, stood a sculpture. A human face carved in basalt, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as though swallowing the last ray of daylight. Around it, small copper fragments lay scattered, oxidized to green. One diver brushed the sand aside and uncovered a thin disk, etched with concentric rings. The inscription read like a solar calendar, but reversed, time counting backward, toward dusk. When they touched it, the sea stirred. A current rose from the trench, slow but certain. Sediment lifted like incense in a submerged cathedral. The copper fragments began to vibrate, faintly glowing. Instruments overloaded. Magnetic readings spiked. Helena's voice cracked through static. Back to the Nereid now. But before they could ascend, the water brightened. From the mouth of the trench, a beam of faint golden light rose, diffused like breath through fog. It lasted less than a minute, then vanished. The ocean returned to darkness, leaving behind only silence, and the faint ringing of the sun's ghost in their ears. On board, the data defied reason. The light corresponded to a wavelength nearly identical to early dawn, 580 nanometers, filtered perfectly through salt water. "It's as if the trench reflected sunrise," murmured one physicist. But there was no sun to reflect. Helena traced her hand over the sonar map, her fingers following the ring of pillars. "If the city of mirrors remembered light," she said softly, "then this place mourns it." In her cabin that night, she studied an old clay tablet, a fragment found in 1902 near Gades, Spain. It described a temple of the drowned sun, built by the Atlantoi, who feared the heavens would forget them. The text claimed they lowered their god into the western sea, so that light would never fully die. She compared the carving, the same spiral, the same face. She closed her notebook and listened. From the hull below, faint vibrations pulsed. Steady, deep, like breath through stone. The Orphean too drifted silently over the temple, and for hours, the crew said nothing. Only the sound of the sea remained, old, patient, eternal. At 3:11, Helena awoke suddenly. The porthole glowed faintly, a soft amber light rising from below. She stepped to the glass. Beneath the ship, in the abyss, the ring of pillars shimmered once more, each faintly illuminated from within, as though reliving a sunrise no one could see. And then, just as gently, the light faded. In the morning, sonar found nothing but sand. Helena wrote in her logbook, "We saw the sun rise from below. Whether it was light or memory, I cannot say. But perhaps not all dawns come from above." She closed the entry. The engines rumbled softly, and far beneath the ship, the buried sun dreamed on, unbroken, unseen, and waiting. 2 days after the buried sun went dark, the sea began to hum again. At first it was faint, a pulse beneath perception, but the instruments aboard the Orphean II recorded it clearly, rhythmic, layered, like the syllables of a language without air. The crew thought it was interference from deep-sea vents until Helena noticed something uncanny. The sound wasn't coming from below. It was moving along the seafloor, traveling laterally, as though tracing a message through stone. By midnight, the source was fixed, a submerged ridge northwest of the Atlantis Massif, where earlier expeditions had mapped nothing but basalt. Helena ordered a descent at dawn. The Nereid entered the water through a column of light rain. The ocean was thick, metallic, charged with vibration. At 3,200 meters, the ridge came into view. Terraces of black rock rising like pages of a half-opened book. Each layer curved inward, hollow, filled with corridors that spiraled toward a central cavity. The divers drifted between walls engraved with thousands of shallow grooves. When they passed near them, the hydrophones sang. The stone itself emitted low frequencies, sustained, harmonic. Every inscription seemed to hold a note. The deeper they moved, the richer the tone became, until the water trembled with resonance. Helena spoke softly through the calm. "It's not a ruin. It's an instrument." On one wall, a carving depicted concentric circles joined by radiating lines, a pattern resembling sound waves frozen in basalt. The symbols below it matched those found in the Temple of the Sun. The same reverse spirals, the same copper traces sealed within the grooves. She realized the two sites were connected not by structure but by frequency. At the chamber's heart stood a dome of polished black stone. When the divers' lights touched it, ripples of pale luminescence traveled across its surface, like breath moving through skin. Instruments detected ultra-low vibrations, infrasound, barely audible to the human ear but strong enough to make the chest ache. They set a recording array and waited. The sound built gradually, a pattern of rising intervals. It was language but mineral, stone speaking in vibration. When slowed 200 times, it resembled sequences of vowels, open, liquid, ancient. Back on the ship, the acoustic team converted the frequencies into visual spectrograms. The image that emerged was astonishing. An ordered lattice repeating at intervals consistent with syntax. A grammar of sound. Helena stared at the screen and whispered, "It's a library, not of books."